There we
All
go.
right,
They're
participants are
coming in.
rolling in.
Oh,
We're all
here they
still here.
come.
Wow, look at that
Awesome.
number.
Whoa.
Welcome,
Okay.
everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, this is
Chat.
the part of the webinar where we discover whether we did things properly or not. So we see that we have some participants rolling in. It means that we actually set this thing up properly. So welcome, everybody. We'll let people roll in here for the next few seconds before we get started. But yeah, thank you guys for showing up, and thank you for joining us on this celebration of sorts. So as most of you guys already know, we are releasing a tutorial collection that we're incredibly excited about. And this is kind of a celebration of sorts where we're going to just kind of hang out with some of our like-minded photographer friends and answer a few questions that you guys might have, and give away a few copies of our tutorial collection. So thank you guys for showing up with us. Hopefully some of you got some sleep last night. I, for one, did not, because in Washington State, we had crazy aurora last night. And hopefully those of you that are far enough north and had some clear skies got out to photograph the aurora as well. And I'm sorry to those of you that did not. So we're going to get started here soon, but I wanted to first of all introduce everybody that we have in the webinar. So first of all, we have the amazing Eric Bennett, that guy right there. We've got Alex Noriega. We've got
Not
Josh.
amazing.
Not amazing.
We got Sarah Marino.
Insert different adjective.
We got Sean
Stupendous.
Bagshaw.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you.
And of course, we've got Michael Shaneblum.
Hello.
Excellent.
Hey,
So
real quick, for some
Yeah.
reason we can't talk to everybody in the chat, so we've all been saying hi to everybody. Yeah, thanks for joining, since we can't do that, but
No?
yeah, we
thanks
can
for
only message
coming.
each other, it looks like. And we
That's
can't
fair.
see the chat if they're putting anything in.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Now the
there
chat
we
is
go.
working.
There we
is
go.
Hey.
There
Hey,
it is.
thanks.
There we go.
There we go.
All right.
Seattle, Australia,
Awesome.
Denver.
That's everybody.
Dwayne
Awesome.
Hart.
So
Nice.
as people roll in, just a couple of like housekeeping things. We're going to be answering questions that people submitted before this webinar. We've got an incredibly long list of questions. I think we had like multiple thousands of questions come in. So
It-
unless we're going to make this a 36-hour webinar, we're probably not going to get to all of them. But we're going to answer as many as we could, and some of the kind of reoccurring questions that like seem to come up pretty often. Also, you can ask questions here. So there's the chat box and there's the Q&A box. So the chat is great for just saying hello and saying hello to maybe some of the familiar friends and faces that you see in the chat there. But also there's the Q&A section. So if you want to leave us a question, do it in the Q&A section. That way it stands out from all the other chat. So the goal for today is this is just going to be a fun, relaxed celebration of sorts where we answer a bunch of questions. And then at the end, we're going to give away 5 copies of the workflow collection, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we're incredibly excited because we launch it today. Website is now live, and we'll drop links to that in the chat as well. So yeah, thank you guys all for showing up. And I'm going to pass it over to Eric, and he's going to start handing out some questions. Remember, if you have questions, you can leave them in the Q&A box there, and we'll get to as many as we can. So awesome. Very excited that you guys all joined us.
All right, well, let's kick this off with the first question, which I'm going to direct to my buddy Sean Bagshaw. So we received some questions about struggling to find compositions and subjects to photograph. Looks like this one was from Zach, and he also asked if we ever find ourselves falling into comfortable composition patterns, you know, maybe like formulas or things like that. I think that's what he refers to. And if so, how can a photographer break out of those patterns? So what do you think about that, Sean?
Well, I can only speak for myself, and I don't know that I do it the way anyone else does it. But for me, photography, nature photography and landscape photography is something that I just love being outside. So my first thing is just getting outside, exploring, looking at the landscape, noticing light, noticing weather, just enjoying being out there is my first thing. So I don't feel like like I'm going out to make any particular image or that I end up then always making the same image. Um, yeah, so for me, it's just really about noticing lots of things, seeing what's there, seeing what draws my eye, pointing my camera at lots of things, doing a lot of trial and error, and deciding later whether, I liked what I captured or not. Um, and sometimes if I do feel like, usually it's not across multiple photo sessions, but in one photo session, if I feel like I kind of get rooted or planted to a place and I'm just taking that kind of same photo or a variation of the same photo over and over and over again, then I'll say, it's time to leave this spot and go look and see what else is there. And if I'm out looking around and I'm exploring and adventuring and noticing new things in the landscape and I end up maybe not taking all the photos I could have taken, I'm okay with that. Because for me, being out there is number one. Number two is if I come back with a photo I like, that's just a bonus there. What about you, Eric, though? I mean, I know some of us are more, I think, directed and thoughtful and maybe intellectual about how we think about taking photos.
Yeah, I think it's normal for anybody to form habits. We all tend to repeat behavior, especially when it's successful. Something that I do that I think naturally helps me to avoid becoming repetitive and redundant and falling into formulas or kind of recipes for my images is whenever I find a scene that captivates me, that makes me want to pull my camera out and try to take a picture, I always handle the scene on a scene by scene basis. So I never try to apply what I did in one place or with one photograph to another photograph. I always just pay attention to the subject matter, the lighting, and I make my decisions of composition, focal length, equipment, my perspective, all that based around what is going to convey that subject and scene in the best way possible. So it just naturally is going to turn out different, and it's never going to be the same because things just never occur quite the same in nature. So, yeah, I would say I just handle it on a scene by scene basis and always just try to do what is best for the particular scene I want to capture. There was another good question that kind of goes with that. They said, what is your opinion of capturing grand landscapes in photography? Are they less expressive than intimates, and why? So I have zero preference for any kind of scene, whether it be a super, super wide panorama of, like 16 frames stitched together, or a super, super macro focus stacked, like tiny scene, because again, I never go out with any kind of idea, any kind of preconceived notion about what I'm going to photograph. I just pay attention to whatever speaks to me, and then I photograph it however I need to. So my portfolio consists of probably 80% intimate scenes, but that's not because I have a preference for them. It's more because when I find a certain subject, it's more likely that there will be fewer things that I can include that will be complementary to the subject than, many things, which is what, entails a grand landscape photograph. And so it's just, I don't find scenes where everything somehow works together and it's all cohesive on that large scale as often as I do on a smaller scale, or even just isolating a subject all by itself, not having any kind of secondary characters. So I just think intimate scenes have a tendency of working out more often than grand landscapes, in my opinion. So yeah, zero preference for either. I think they're both great. They both come down to the same principles, just, finding a subject, including things around it that complement it, excluding anything that doesn't, and whether that ends up being a large scene or a small scene, that's irrelevant to me. There's another question that I'll direct to Alex, Josh, and Nick. We received quite a few questions about planning and how to go about the process of photography once you arrive at a location. So this question is, what is your thought process when you arrive at a location? How much planning have you done? What apps have you used? How do you balance scouting versus responding to what you see in front of you? And what do you look for when you're at a location? So I think Alex, Josh, and Nick will all have different answers because I think they all have a unique approach. But we'll start with Josh on this one.
Yeah, I love this question because for me, I operate in two extreme ends of the photography spectrum. On one hand, I love going out completely organically, just responding to a scene that I see. And my process is really similar to what Sean and Eric described, where I'm just responding to what I like about a scene, right? And I'll let you guys talk more about that. And then on the other extreme end of that, when there are certain things that you're trying to make happen, whether it's aurora, like last night, or photographing an eclipse, or like I love to shoot the full moon, right? And that was like part of my contribution to this workflow collection is how do you plan and photograph the full moon, which requires a lot of planning. And the more that you can stack the deck in your favor, so that's scouting, knowing amazing locations that you can get to easily in a variety of different angles. So no matter, if it's the moon or the light is doing something great to the northeast, do you already maybe have a composition in your mind from a place that you spend a bunch of time that you can get to easily? So you don't have to, when the conditions are changing quickly, you don't necessarily have to scramble because you have your back pocket full of all these options and ideas. I mean, I could talk about planning for the entire webinar. I'll just say that when I'm doing really high level moon planning stuff, I'm using photo pills. And I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to Alex and Nick to offer their perspective.
Alex.
Oh,
How do you
okay.
approach it, Alex?
Yeah, he threw it to both of us. Hello, everyone. Well, this is about workflow, right? So I kind of have an in-field workflow where I show up and generally speaking, the camera is not even out yet. So I kind of have phases of engagement and interest, where the first phase would be camera still in the bag and I'm just kind of walking around looking. I'm just observing, just seeing what I like, seeing what's happening. And I think that's a good thing to ask yourself anytime that you're wondering what to shoot, or anytime you show up at a new place, like what's happening right now? What's the light doing? What's different right now that wouldn't be happening any other time of day? And then if I get interested in something, maybe I'll pull out my phone. I keep it in the shoulder pocket of the Shimoda and like start framing things up. I pinch zoom and just try to pick out different framings, see if it kind of interests me. And then I might get the camera out and start hand holding, just kind of playing with it with my actual lens and seeing in full quality, like what I can do with that lens, what that focal length is going to allow me to do. And then if I'm really interested in it, then I'll pull out the tripod and get on a tripod and make the shot, like with care. So the reason for that workflow is that if you start with a tripod, you're more likely to start right at eye height. You're not going to try different perspectives. You're just more likely to put yourself in a box. And if I'm walking around without a camera in my hand and without a tripod in my hand, then I'm more likely to, I don't know, duck under that next tree and see what's over there, or like crouch down and see what the light is doing in the reflection, like from a certain perspective. So I just have those varying degrees, and it's kind of starting with walking around and ending with the serious tripod shot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it sounds like you never plan anything out beforehand, Alex. You go into the field without any kind of idea.
And that's the other thing, is Josh mentioned like kind of having things in your back pocket. When you get to know a place, that's one of the best things about it is, like in Yosemite, like El Cap Meadow, in the fall, in late morning, there's really great backlit trees. And that's enough you might go make a totally unique photo just knowing that there's a lot of that sort of potential at that time. So that's like the extent of my planning, is like, I know a certain place has something of that type happening roughly around that time, and I might try to show up then if I'm really interested in that sort of shot. But also I just show up and see what happens all the time. You don't learn that stuff without a plan for the first time.
One of the reasons that I like seascape photography so much and storm photography is that like it's never really, it's ever changing. It's always changing. And so like that, even though that you're kind of like Josh said, stacking the deck in your favor, meaning choosing when you go. For me, I'm usually choosing interesting weather as one of the determining factors on, when I go on a trip. That way I'm kind of stacking the interest deck in my favor. We're going to have interesting skies, which will definitely make these photos a little bit better. But one of the reasons I love seascape photography so much is that no matter how many times you go to a location, it's always changing. It's always different. Sometimes there's a rock where there was never a rock before. Sometimes the waves are reaching parts of the beach that they don't normally reach. And for that reason, you can go to a location that you know well, but it's different. And you can have that experience of just walking around and reacting to what you see and what you like, but also do it in a way that is different than it's been done before in a location that you know well. So it's kind of like a mix of what Josh and Alex were saying for me with Seascapes, because I'm paying attention to weather, so I'm very picky about when I go. But then when I get there, then I try to turn off all those preconceived notions and ideas, and I try not to pre-visualize too much, and I try to just react to what's happening. Because for me, that's the fun part of photography, is just being, the kid in the candy store with his eyes wide open, like picking out all of the beautiful things that you like. Sometimes if you go in with too many preconceived notions, you're just disappointed because that idea didn't work out, even though there was many other ideas that could have. So for me, that's the way I like to operate.
Always allow room for spontaneity, have some flexibility, even if you are planning something out. Definitely.
Absolutely.
I mean, all of my favorite photographs were things that I never even anticipated I would photograph, the morning of. So they've all been surprises, which is really nice. All right, so we received a lot of great questions about working with different kinds of lighting throughout the day. So this first one is from Douglas, and he asked, how important are the time of day and the weather in landscape photography? And are sunrise and sunset necessarily the best times? Sarah, why don't you go ahead and share what you think about that?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're super excited to be here talking about photography with all of you. When I think about light, so of course light matters. Light is essential to creating visually captivating photographs. I think the thing that I try not to do in my own workflow is, first, I try not to think in black and white terms, even though, like, for the workflow collection, my course was on black and white, so it does relate to how I think about light. But we often hear that there's good light in photography and that there's bad light in photography, and we only photograph when there's good light. Well, what is good light? Is that color in the sky? Is that the only definition? So I think it's much more helpful to stop thinking in terms of good light or bad light, and instead try to think about what's happening with the light in front of me, and how is it interacting with the landscape in an interesting way. And sometimes that might be perfect for a big grand landscape, that a lot is happening with the sky and how the light is interacting with the landscape. And so that might work really well for a wide angle scene. In other cases, there might be small nuances of light that are happening, like an edge of light on a hillside, or one tree that's illuminated, or an interesting contrast between light and shadow. And so if those little things are happening, the grander light might be what we might typically consider bad, but if we zoom in on that one little detail, it actually might create a really captivating photograph. So I think getting out of the mindset of good light and bad light, and instead really focusing on just assessing what's in front of you in a non-judgmental way, and then thinking about how can I pair the light that's happening in front of me with a photographic opportunity in a way that flatters the subject. So whenever I'm out in nature, that's the workflow that I'm going through in my mind, is assessing what's happening with the light overall, and then starting to think about those little details that might also be creating interesting interactions. So that's generally my approach, and that's one of the reasons that I focused on black and white photography for our workflow collection, is because when you're thinking with that mindset, you're getting out of the habit of just photographing at sunrise or sunset, and instead you're looking for opportunities throughout the day. So especially with black and white photography, that strong light and strong shadow can actually create really dynamic, visually interesting contrast, and that you can create a photograph out of that. So the light might not be colorful and it might not be around the golden hour, but it still could create a really compelling photograph. So those are some of the things that I'm always thinking about with regard to light.
And in most scenarios, when you're photographing at sunrise or sunset, what it typically entails is a really bright, colorful, vibrant sky, but the landscape is still very dark and flat. So a lot of times, like, sunrise and sunset don't actually complement a lot of the things you're photographing, because by the time the actual subject of the photograph that's below the horizon gets any light, it's already well past sunrise or well past sunset, or like that pink red light that everybody seems attracted to. So a lot of times, like, it's kind of ironic that sunrise and sunset are considered the best times to make photographs, and by some people the only times, when in reality they hardly ever complement anything in the landscape, like from what I've found. So
Yeah, and the other thing is just color palette. Like sometimes if you have different, different shades of green and things in the foreground below that horizon line, those reds are not going to complement them very well. Like I live in Eastern Washington in the Palouse, and when you get a really good sunset, it seldom photographs well here simply because it really clashes pretty hard with all the greens. A lot of times the color palette matters far more than how blazing that sunset or sunrise was.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
a great point, Nick, about the color palette matching, like the color palette in the sky and your subject. Because a lot of times you'll see fall colors photos. So let's take really golden aspens with a pink sky. Well,
Yeah,
what
so
about beautiful blue storm clouds
Yeah.
or white
Mhm.
puffy clouds?
They're
Those
complementary
actually,
colors.
yeah, they might look much better together, whereas pink and yellow might not,
Yep.
in some cases, might not look that great.
Yeah, the yellow might not separate. Like you might not even be able to see the trees against the sky. Same thing in the Southwest with red rock. Like I don't think sunsets, blazing sunsets, are the best sky for a red rock landscape. I think a dark, stormy blue sky works a lot better.
yeah,
but
so as the expert on color, since I made the color control video for this workflow collection, I'll just jump in and say, like I stress in my video when I'm showing different examples before I process this image from start to finish, I explained that color work really begins in the field with the colors that you choose to combine within your frame. Yep. And it's not just something you can fix later on in Photoshop or something that you solely address later on with HSL sliders and stuff like that. You really need to pay attention to the colors that the lighting is creating in the field, and then also the colors, the inherent colors of the objects that you're photographing to start to create a very cohesive and harmonious and eye-pleasing palette. So
yeah, but having said that, if I'm on a wet sand beach, give me that color. Give me that sunset, because then you're reflecting reflecting all that color, and there's no colors that are really conflicting with it.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric, along that those lines, we have a question that is asking about struggling with red orange rock during golden hour, and it says this may be a question for Eric, but how should I tame the heat without losing the light? And I think your chapter in the workflow collection really deals with that a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So trying to understand the question, it sounds like dealing with like the red channel, like without it clipping, without, having to underexpose too much.
Well, I think
so.
I think part of it, before you get into that, is about losing the intensity of the reds if you cool it down, for example, and so like maintaining the feeling of the light while controlling it.
So an important thing to do is, a lot of people when they photograph a scene with really intense warm light, I think their inclination is to keep the white balance really warm so that they don't lose that warmth. But in reality, you're kind of, unless you have some kind of cool tones in the scene to juxtapose against that warmth, it's really not going to feel warm, and you're just going to have a color cast, and you're not going to get nice color separation and stuff like that. So it's important to set the white balance in a way that complements both the highlights and the shadows. It's not going to make the highlights look perfect right away, but it's a great place to start. And then you can use luminosity masks like we all use in our workflows to target those highlights all by themselves and reintroduce that warmth and bump it up a bit more without sacrificing the cool tones in your shadows. So white balance is a really important tool all the time, and especially when you're photographing scenes with, warm light, hitting warm objects, stuff like that. You need to set that white balance right and not just like sacrifice all the other tones just for the tones of those highlights. Hopefully that answers the question. So this next one I'm going to direct to Michael, and this one's from Willie. And this is back to utilizing different kinds of lighting throughout the day. So he's wondering how you can make the best use of harsh midday light in your photography instead of just avoiding it, just sitting around all day waiting for sunset. And that's in terms of photographing in the field and also when it comes to editing it.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier, but I don't really think there's ever a situation where you can't take a photograph. Like, there's always a photograph to be had. It just depends on how creative you're willing to be with utilizing the light for a certain type of subject. So it really depends on where you are when it comes to like harsh light, and what you're trying to photograph. Like, for example, black and white can work really well with harsh light. But what I like to do with harsh light, let's say I'm like on a beach or something like that, I actually think that the way the harsh light hits the sand and reflects off the sand can create some just beautiful patterns. And I think I posted a bunch of like black and white images on Instagram recently where they were all taken midday, super harsh light, but they were some of my favorite images that I took the entire trip. Like I saw 5 or 6 really epic sunsets, and the pictures were fine, but the black and whites that I took just like on that random afternoon were so cool. Um, I mean, generally with harsh light, I I usually don't include the sky. Not that you have to not include the sky. You can definitely take pictures that include the sky with harsh light, but I tend to focus on smaller scenes and things like that. But the cool thing about harsh light, especially midday light, is you can transform midday light into more pleasing soft light if you want to. And it depends on where you are, but let's say, you're shooting and it's midday and the sun is coming down. Let's say you find like a rock wall that's in some open shade. Then you could utilize that. And since you have the harsh light bouncing around, it could make that light reflecting back into the rock wall or into the canyon or into a stream or something like that even more vivid and more intense. And then you could, I've had that occasion where, let's say, um, I'm in Utah photographing a canyon and it's midday and the light is bouncing around. And I've taken a few pictures of like the golden light reflecting off of the stream. And people are like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Did you shoot that in some intense sunset somewhere? And it's like, no, that was like noon, just like in a canyon. So there's always ways you can take that harsh light. It's all about just kind of transforming it depending on the subject, I would say.
Yeah, I think you're describing where light and shadow meet too. That's always a good place to look. And in canyons,
Mhm.
that's all over the place. Like you could have a tree lit up by 1 p.m. light against a nice black wall. You could have the reflected light you described. The water shot that you described, I imagine there's like kind of yellowish orange light being reflected on there, but also the blue sky above. Like that's actually to your advantage in that sort of shot
You could
because you
create color
get
contrasts out of
the
it
light,
too.
the water is kind of flowing all over the place, and so it's reflecting at different angles. It'll get the blue sky above you and the orange wall across the river from you. So like just pay attention to where the light and shadow meet.
Spotlighting too. Like you were saying, dark backgrounds, a little bit of
Yeah.
spotlighting. If you can
Oh,
find an area where the light is piercing through, but then everything else is in shadow, it's just about creating contrast out of it. Well, one of the ways you can use it.
throw a few clouds in there too. Get some nice shadows over the landscape.
When you say throw clouds in there, are you meaning like sky drop,
No,
Alex?
I mean,
Is that what you do?
I mean, you get a day with some partial clouds, and
Mhm.
get that spotlighting. That's actually preferable when the sun's up higher, I think, too.
Nice. Good stuff. This next question is from Greg, and I'm gonna have Josh answer this one first. So he asked about knowing where to focus in order to get everything in focus in a scene, because that's one of his biggest challenges. So is there a tried and true approach to getting it right? What about hyperfocal distance? How do you handle that, Josh?
There really is a tried and true method to approaching focus now, especially as soon as live view was invented. Up to the point that we had live view in our cameras, you really had to understand hyperfocal distance and know for each lens that you had the focal length that you were shooting at, how close could you be to your foreground, how far away you were from your background. And for me personally, I think a lot of times in the journey of being a photographer, practice gets lost. Like these are skills. And I mean, there were days and that I would just go out and I would practice focusing at different spots and different f-stops to see what happened. And I just learned that, and I built kind of this intuitive approach to focus. But now that you have live view, almost every camera has a way to see what your depth of field is, preview your depth of field before you even take the shot. And so, a good place to start, especially if you're shooting wide angle scenes, it gets a little trickier the more telephoto you get. But if you're shooting a wide angle scene, you start maybe focusing about a third of the way up from the bottom of the frame, and then just zoom in on your live view and see if your foreground's sharp and see if your background's sharp. And if they are, great, take the shot. If one is soft, it either means you need to move that range of focus toward the foreground or toward the background, or you need to expand your depth of field. And so you can just try those two options. Now, the one caveat to that is Nikon, and I'm a Nikon photographer, and it kills me the way that they implement their depth of field preview on their mirrorless cameras is not ideal, because you can't zoom in to 100% or magnify, I should say, digitally and do depth of field preview. So
you have to
sometimes
take the
you just
shot
might
and
be,
play it back.
yeah, take the shot and play it back. So
Yeah, on Canon you can zoom in, no problem. Just
Canon you can zoom in.
get a little
Sony,
depth of field preview.
Olympus. Yeah. So that's kind of annoying, but I think that still that idea of practice is very applicable, where if you just go out and you set yourself up and you go, okay, I'm 5 feet from a foreground subject, I'm at 35 millimeters, and my background is these mountains in the distance. What happens if I focus on the rock at f8? Where does my focus drop? And the more you do that, the more you just build up an idea, an instinctive map in your mind of depth of focus and field. And I would suspect very few of you guys here ever really think too consciously about focus, right? You just look at a scene and you go, oh, I know where I kind of need to focus and what f-stop I need to be at. And then maybe you'll look at playback just to refine it, just to make sure. But that just comes from experience and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice.
Sarah, why don't you share some instances where you wouldn't want to have the whole image in focus?
Yeah, well, I'll just reiterate about what Josh said about practice. I think that's probably actually one of the most important lessons for this entire discussion with regard to workflow. Like at every step of the process, the more you practice, the more natural it becomes and the more energy you can focus on creativity and expression. But with regard to Eric's specific question about when you don't want everything in focus, one of the things that I do a lot is experimenting with shallow depth of field and also focusing well into my subject. So one of my portfolios that probably I would consider one of my more unique bodies of work is all about making soft portraits of plants where just one little thin part of a subject is in focus. And a lot of the reason that I do that is both to clean up messy scenes, where by throwing some of the foreground out of focus and the background out of focus with a really small subject, you're hiding a lot of the mess and chaos of nature. You're also creating more abstract presentations of subjects. Like if you take a subject like a cactus that's really harsh and we think of cactus as something we want to stay away from. Well, if we treat it with shallow depth of field, we're actually highlighting completely different qualities of that subject and portraying it in a different way, where it feels like soft and pastel, and it just makes people maybe rethink what the qualities of that subject are. So it's about just taking one small piece of a subject, putting the focus like at f2.8 on just that one interesting line or an interesting curve or some particular shape, and then letting the rest fall to softness and pastel colors. And for me, it's just about expressing a different side of the natural world. So I do everything from where I have everything from front to back, focus stacked with 15 files, all the way to one little tiny interesting shape in focus with shallow depth of field, and then everything in between. And for me, I think learning how to focus at every step of that process, so hyperfocal distance, focus stacking with all different sorts of scenarios, learning how to use shallow depth of field with very small subjects, with very large subjects, that the more you experiment and practice with those skills, the more opportunities you'll see when you're out in nature. So I think that's another one of the workflow benefits of working on these skills, is then you just see more opportunities to photograph when you're outside.
I think the main thing is just whether you have something in focus or out of focus in your scene, it needs to be intentional so it doesn't feel accidental, it's not distracting. And it needs to be out of focus enough, because if it's like halfway out of focus, it can be kind of questionable for the viewer, like, oh, was this accidental? Was this on purpose? Like, I can kind of see it, but I kind of can't. Or if your subject isn't quite in focus, where it's really you want the eye to like latch onto, and where you want people to really end up, like that can be very distracting because they can't really appreciate the message of the photo as much as possible.
Another thing related to, well, I'll say one sentence and then you can go, Alex.
Okay.
Related to what Eric was saying, being intentional. When teaching photography and working with shallow depth of field and focusing, one of the things I often see is somebody will focus only on the thing that's closest to them. And there you can focus throughout an entire scene and have things in front of your main subject, things behind it, out of focus. And that can be a really intentional creative decision. And thinking through that can present all kinds of interesting opportunities beyond just focusing on that thing that's closest to you.
I just wanted to add that because Sarah was talking about kind of a small scene, like the cactus example, that even in grand scenes, like say you have a bunch of mountains in the background and they're all misty and foggy, and then you have like a really sharp tree that's kind of like the main focus of your composition, like that would be where I'd want it to be sharp. I don't care that the mountains are slightly out of focus. So, if I shoot the tree at f/16 and the mountains aren't perfectly tack sharp, I mean, they're back there in the fog and mist anyway. Like that's how they're supposed to look. So some of it is just photography. Like sometimes things are out of focus. That's just part of photography. And it's just about using it intentionally, like they said. And that applies to all scenes. So
can I jump in one more quick thought on that? Just to piggyback off of something that Sarah said about focusing right at the very beginning, or you have the range all the way through the scene. A lot of times if I'm leading a workshop or a photo tour, the participant will ask, where's the best place to do, or how do you best do XYZ? Should I focus here? Should I focus there? And so often the answer to that is, I don't know. Why don't you try it and find out? Because there's this idea that we're all supposed to do photography right. There's a right way to do it. And we forget that it's an experimental, exploratory process. And that's so much of how we develop our own vision and our own workflow. And so if you're in a scene and you're shooting something like Sarah's describing, a beautiful cactus that has all these cool little, pinprick needles sticking out everywhere, and you're going, well, I don't know how to approach this. Should I focus here? Should I focus there? Focus all the places. Focus at the front, the middle, the back. Try it all. And then I guarantee you, when you look at those images later, you'll go, oh, boom, that's the one. Or you'll say, oh, I didn't quite get there, but next time I know this is how I should approach it.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't tell you how many. Oh, sorry. Just jumping in.
And experimenting while you're still there in the field, that's the time to experiment, try different things. That way, when you go back to your computer and you're looking at your 27-inch monitor or 32-inch monitor, that's when you make the decision as to which one is best. But when you're in the field and you're looking at that tiny little baseball card sized screen on the back of your camera, that's not really the best time to make those definitive decisions. This is the best way to shoot it, and this is the only way I'm going to shoot it. That's the time to give yourself options, to have fun, play with different ideas, and then decide later which ideas worked out best.
Yeah. Well, presumably on digital, and it's not costing you anything to try it both ways.
Exactly.
As long as the light isn't going to be gone in 30 seconds, then you can afford to try different ways. And
storage is way cheaper than travel.
Yeah. That was just what I was going to say, is that like so many things for me happen because of an accident. Like, oh, I overexposed, but that looks really nice high key. Like, what if I went high key black and white? Like, and then I pop the camera in monochrome and just see what that looks like. Or yeah, I missed focus, but actually I like that softer. So what if I did ICM? Or if you experiment, then you might see something that you couldn't pre-visualize, and then you can start pulling on that thread and you might find something totally unexpected.
So for those of you that have taken the time to attend live, we really want to try to answer most of your questions, but I've been seeing some questions getting put into the chat, which we probably won't be able to dig up. So if you do have a question, I just want to remind you to please put it in the Q&A so that we can make sure we don't miss it and hopefully be able to answer it before we finish. So I'm going to move on to the next question now, and I'll go ahead and answer this one. It looks like this came from several different people. So we got lots of questions about post-processing, especially around our overall approaches and working with colors. And we received a few more technical questions like when to apply sharpening and noise reduction. So we're going to go through some of those. This first one came from John, Brett, Douglas, and others. Looks like they all had a similar question. So they're wondering if it's important to have a workflow that is the same for every photograph, or if it's better to consider the needs of each photo individually. So to me, it absolutely makes zero sense to try and edit a photograph of harsh midday light with stark contrast and very neutral colored lighting, the same way that you would process a scene with very soft, colorful orange lighting. You're just not going to do the same things because it's just a completely different scenario. So whenever I edit all of my images, I handle them on an image by image basis. And I really process my images according to the lighting more than anything that I've captured. And then also the feelings that I feel the subject matter expresses. I just want to enhance those things. So, sometimes I want images to have a more dramatic feeling. Sometimes I want images to have a quieter, more serene feeling. And that's going to entail different post processing techniques. So, to put it in a nutshell, if I photographed a scene in intense lighting, it's going to have intense contrast. If I photograph a scene in soft lighting, it's going to have soft contrast. You run into issues when you photograph scenes in soft lighting and you try to introduce intense contrast because the light just isn't naturally producing that anyways. Or if you photograph a scene in very intense contrast and you try to undo that contrast and turn it into a soft contrast image, it's just not going to match the kind of lighting that was present. And that's usually when things look off and they just don't look right. And that's why it's so important to photograph scenes in the kind of lighting that actually complements them in the first place, instead of trying to rely on post-processing to fix things that you didn't pay attention to or intentionally use in the field. So, Sean, what about you? How do you? Oh, your name's Sean, Alex?
Oh, I started saying that before you started saying Sean, but
I haven't heard much from Sean, so I want to hear what he thinks.
Yeah, let's hear from Sean.
He knows a little bit about editing.
A little bit about editing. Remind me the first part of that question, though, Eric. I was deep into answering some of the live questions coming in.
Your TikTok messages. You're responding to your DMs on TikTok, Sean?
Yeah, my DMs. Yeah, I'm deep in my DMs. So yeah, just review the question for me real quick.
Is it important to come up with a workflow that you apply to every single image, or is it more about doing what's best for the image itself?
Yeah, what's best for the image itself would be my short answer to that. I mean, there are certain things that I pretty much apply every time on certain on all images. Obviously, certain things about getting rid of chromatic aberration, that little checkbox in Lightroom. Obviously, checking out noise levels and dealing with that, and sharpness and white balance and things like that. That I'm going to go through kind of a checklist that I'm going to hit every time. But then beyond that, I really just go through a series of, subsequently asking myself, what do I think this image needs next? And whatever occurs to me or pops into my mind, I work on that thing. And then when I feel like I've addressed that thing, then I ask myself that question again. What do I think the image needs now? And then I just continue to work incrementally like that. And at some point, I eventually get to a place where I don't think it needs anything else. And then at that point, I usually let it sit for a day and come back and see if now there's anything I think it needs. And sometimes that process for me continues on for months or weeks or years. And some images in that one session, I get to a place where I feel it's good. But in that way, every single time I work on an image, it's a different process.
Right, Alex.
Oh, I'm allowed to speak. Yeah, I was just going to say there's a couple things to do on everything, and like any image I open, I'm probably going straight for white balance or exposure just because I want to get big reads. Like I want to see what's this like cooler, what's this like warmer, what's it like brighter, what's it like low key darker. Like just kind of figure out a direction to go first. And beyond that, then like Eric said, it's like don't fight the subject, don't fight the light by having a set rigid thing that you do. You follow whatever you're given in the raw, and maybe you have a direction for it that you came up with in the field, like you thought of some creative thing you're going to do with it later. I would recommend writing that down, or when you first import, kind of make a quick rough draft of that just so you have that idea saved. But yeah, just start with seeing a big direction to go and then follow the subject in the light.
So this next question, Alex and Michael, I feel like you both have really distinct styles when it comes to post processing. Like it's very easy for me to tell when an image is yours as soon as it pops up because of the processing. Alex, you can start first, but how do you think you developed that style? How did that come about?
I haven't heard much from Michael. I think he should go first. I'd
Uh,
love to hear from you, buddy.
oh, okay.
Putting him on the spot.
The pressure. Okay. To be honest, so I think like style with post process, and this is just my personal experience. I'm sure everyone's different, but for me, it's not something I ever tried to force. I think that was the biggest thing because I think the more you try and find these techniques and force a style, it very much comes off like you force this style. It doesn't feel quite as natural when like all of a sudden you pivot and, do this very specific thing. For me, it was just like I got started with post processing a long time ago. I was like really interested in editing when I was a kid, and I just played around with every single tool in Photoshop. And I had Lightroom Beta when it came out. And I think even before Photoshop, I was playing around with a program called Fireworks, like back when Macromedia was still a company, until Adobe bought them out. But yeah, like it's always just been an interest of mine. So I like playing around with colors and I think over time I realized I liked kind of like a soft painterly look to the images. That's just what naturally sort of developed out of my interests. So I found little techniques that work for me to get that style. Sometimes taking the crunchiness away from digital files. Sometimes digital files are like they're really sharp, they're really crunchy. So I
Do you
wanted
think that influences the way you shoot in the field as well? Like that look that you have a preference for?
I actually don't think so. No, I'm not really. I mean, sometimes I'm thinking about how I might process an image later on, but yeah, what usually I'm just focused on what it looks like on the back of the viewfinder and what it looks like to my eyes rather than like, oh, I'm going to soften this out later in post. But the cool thing about post processing is there's a million different ways of doing everything. And I guess like for anyone who's looking to improve their post processing and their style, I would encourage you just learn as much as you possibly can and play around with the programs as much as you possibly can. You don't even have to have an intention with, just go and mess around, like see what different tools do. And over time, you'll just sort of understand, oh, if I use that plus that, I can do that. And you'll end up, building your sort of toolkit that you'll probably use for a long time. I mean, I still use the same post-processing tools that I've used for years and years and years. Like it hasn't changed that much because that's what I enjoy doing. So, Alex,
So the question's about how we develop that
sorry
style
for
of post
interrupting.
processing. No, I'm
Yeah.
just making sure that I don't go on the wrong tangent here. So, um, I think it's just a set of preferences. Like it's really strong preferences for certain things, and for me, and it's cleaning up basically. So reducing distractions. Like I can't think of any other reason that you'd know that a photo is mine aside from like I have certain preferences for tonality. Like if you put a bunch of my photos together from the last, I don't know, 4 years, and they're all different subjects, they probably have like similar looking histograms unless they're outliers, like a super high key image or a super dark image, similar contrast levels. And that's just like over time, I've developed what I like, but that's only because I've taken all this inspiration from elsewhere, like not just in
Mhm.
photography, like films and video games and like any just being out in nature, like what I see in person and other people's photography and my own photography and like in the past and present, like I take all of that and that all informs like, oh, I like this and that. And so I like to have my blacks a little more lifted. Like I don't like super harsh deep shadow contrast. Like I feel like that's a distraction from the light. So I like to put my contrast in the light side of things and let the shadows be a little lower contrast. And that's just like something you develop over time. Like you'll have a set of preferences and that's what forms your style. And that's all taken from your experience and inspirations elsewhere. And what was I going to say? Lost my train of thought.
Okay.
Hey, Eric,
So, yeah.
do we have time for a quick question from the live audience for Nick?
Well,
No.
this one kind of goes off of what we just said. So hold that thought, and then right after
Okay.
this question, we'll get to that. Okay.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
buddy. So let's say you're somebody that wants to photograph, deserts and forests, wide angle scenes, intimate scenes. What can you do to maintain kind of a cohesive aesthetic through your portfolio so it's not just like all over the place? What do you think, Sarah?
Sorry, I was in the chat.
I love it when people get caught off guard, like, what? Me?
So the question was about creating a consistent aesthetic in a portfolio. Is that correct?
Yeah. So if you're photographing all different kinds of things, places, subject matter, how can you still maintain a cohesive aesthetic?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the thinking about themes in your work and then seeing how those play out when you're curating collections and how you're presenting your work is one of the most important things, I think. So I'll give an example that's very pertinent to a trip that I just took, actually with Bree Stockwell and Martha Montiel, who are both in the chat today. We were hanging out at White Sands National Park a couple weeks ago, photographing, and I'm working on putting together my portfolio of work from that trip. And instead of looking at each image in isolation, I'm instead thinking about that cohesive portfolio before I even start processing the first photo. So with this particular portfolio, I could take things in a very high contrast, dramatic colors direction, or I could go in more of a light, bright pastel feel. And that decision before I ever start processing is, I think, it really helps make a more cohesive portfolio. So in this particular case, I'm choosing to go in the more pastel color direction. Almost all of my histograms are entirely on the right side. So they're low contrast, gentle pastel colors. I'm choosing compositions that generally communicate concepts like grace and elegance and harmony. So by thinking through those things as I'm curating and going through all the photos that I took, and I was even feeling some of this in the field. Like a couple of days in, I'm thinking, okay, I'm gravitating more towards these compositions because I know that they'll really work well together in a portfolio later. And then once I'm at home, when I'm choosing which photos to process, I'm thinking through what will look good together. As I'm processing, I'm thinking about harmonizing the colors. So if I have blues across an entire portfolio of 30 photographs, I'm going to try to harmonize some of those blues. So instead of having some with a more cyan tint and some with a more kind of purplish blue, I'm thinking about, I want all of my blues to look similar so that when they follow one another in a portfolio, they're going to lead into each other nicely in terms of color and feel and processing. So that's a really practical example of photos that I'm working on right now that I think helps. All of those things I think help bring together that more cohesive look for a body of work.
Nice. Anybody else want to chime in on that?
With enough Orton effect, it all looks the same.
What do you use, about 90% on that?
Yeah, 90% opacity.
Well, then it doesn't matter if anything's in focus, does it?
I mean, if people don't have to go like this when they look at your photo, it's not enough Orton effect.
Well, that's how you keep them engaged. Just like trying to get them to see the photo through the Vaseline effect. Vaseline on the lens.
Trying to clean their glasses when they look at or like wipe their screen. Like, is there a bunch of Vaseline on this screen?
That's actually a fun game I set up for myself.
Josh's processing advice is like 100% saturation and Nick's is 100% Orton. Is that like the bottom line that we're going for?
I mean, that's pretty much all of the tutorials like summed up.
Yeah, like easy.
Yep.
Can I ask if anyone's ever sneezed on their screen and then forgot to clean it off, and then you just think you have terrible dust spots, and it turns out you just need to clean your screen?
I've definitely tried cloning out something that was on my monitor and not in the image for a while.
Oh my god,
Alex!
I'm glad no
one time I was shooting at the coast, and I had a terrible dust spot on my sensor, or it was like a little piece of yarn or something. I could see it on every image. And I'm literally standing in the water. It's in the tropics, and I'm shooting back towards the beach. And so I don't have anything with me. I just have my camera, all my blower, everything's up in my bag And so I took the lens off to try to get this little hair,
Oh,
and I
no.
blew on my sensor, and all of this spit just coated the sensor with droplets. And now I had just like, I mean, it was great, actually. It was an
It's
experiment.
way better then, right?
Yeah, it was an experiment. And yeah, it really gave the sense of water in the image, you know?
Yeah. Nice sense of depth.
Close and far drops.
All right, Sean, what was that question you wanted to bring up?
So this is a question for Nick that I think dovetails well into your course or your section of the course, and it's about planning for giant waves and seascapes. And number one is the first part of the question is, Nick, what's your approach to plan giant waves and seascapes? Which you can probably say, give just a
go
quick
on a big
nod to
wave
your
day.
chapter. But the second part, I think that you maybe don't answer in your chapter is how do you pick safe locations to park while you're in the field around Washington and Olympia? I
Oh.
heard there are lots of vehicle break-ins.
The parking thing is that's not really something that I consider a lot because I come from a small town and I'm kind of naive in that way. Um, Parking around other vehicles, not being out there too late. A lot of break-ins happen like, once twilight hits and it starts getting dark and people feel like they can get away with more. So I don't have great advice on that, unfortunately, but just make sure you don't obviously have like super expensive stuff sitting in the back seat, like a camera bag or a lens or something. Because that's just like a steal me sign. But as far as like planning for seascapes, obviously my entire tutorial is about that, and I'm do a lot better job in my hour and a half talking about that than I will in my 30 seconds. But the big thing is like monitoring incoming storms. And there's several different sources that I use for that. There's a bunch of different like surf and wave height prediction websites and apps. Like one is called Surfline, another is called Magic Seaweed, another is called surfforecast.com. Those are really useful. But also just making sure that the wave direction is going to happen in a favorable direction, because the direction that the waves are coming in matters a lot. So you have to kind of like look at a map view of the area that you're looking at and make sure that, if the waves are coming from, say, the southwest, that they're going to enter that cove or that area that you want them to enter. If, the bay that you're photographing is pointed this way and the waves are coming this way, you're not going to get any waves. So little things like that matter. And also like, the depth of the tides matter quite a bit. So if you're at a low tide during your shoot, the waves are going to get interrupted before they can actually come and collide with those cliff sides. So a lot of times you're looking for a medium to a high tide as well. That way they're not getting busted up by the rocks as much and stuff. So yeah, I cover a lot more in my tutorial, but those are a couple of the things that I always think about.
So for anybody watching this that hasn't visited our website yet, that just went live with all the details almost an hour ago, we each provided one course for the workflow collection. Each course is about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And so Sean's course was on developing and printing. My course was on color control. Josh's course was on planning amazing moon photos. Sarah's, like she mentioned, was about bold black and white photography. That goes into shooting and processing. Alex's video is all about controlling dynamic light in post-processing. Nick's video, like he just said, is about planning for dramatic seascapes. That also goes into post-processing as well as shooting. And Michael Chamblum's video was about, approaching desert scenes in terms of kinds of lighting you can use that are complementary, composition, and also post-processing. And then there's also a bonus video, which was a roundtable discussion that we recorded afterwards, where we just all kind of talked about each of our courses and little hiccups that we had and, things that we wanted to focus on and stuff like that. So for anybody that hasn't checked out our website, there is more information on there, but that's basically what we're all talking about.
LearnNaturePhotography.com. Should say it.
Yeah. LearnNaturePhotography.com. Just to reiterate that.
Chat. So if you don't have the chat open, there's a whole
Yeah, I don't think everyone has
discussion. There's
chat
a
open. So
huge, like, lively discussion going on in the chat. So if anybody doesn't have that chat window open, get it open. There's a ton of stuff. It's fun over there. Make sure you have your chat box set to everyone so we can all see your comments, though.
So we still have literally thousands of questions left, but since we only have 30 minutes remaining, I feel like a lot of people are really, really interested, and a lot of people really struggle with printing. So Sean's course, like I said, is all about editing your images so that you can print them and things that you should do. So Sean, obviously you don't need to go into everything that you explained in the video because that would kind of defeat the purpose, but maybe what's kind of some philosophy behind it, or you're just your general thinking and workflow when it comes to printing.
Yeah, printing, it's funny because anyone who photographed in the film days, or still photographs with film, taking a photo, developing a photo, and printing a photo were kind of all the same thing, or at least the developing and the printing, because in order to develop the photo, you made a print. That was the whole process. And we're in a whole different situation now with digital imaging, because we take a photo and then we develop a photo on our computers for the screen. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to print it. And so the printing is really a whole separate workflow from the developing. So I think of it, and I talk about this in my course, is that no matter what, we're still developing for the screen in digital photography, because that's the thing that we have to work with. If we could develop on something else, that'd be great, but we can't. So we're developing to make the image look how we want on the screen. And some important things there are to control the lighting in your working space, because if the light's changing, then how you see the image on your screen is changing. So if you have open windows next to your computer, or you walk around with a laptop and edit in different rooms of your house all the time, then every time you do an editing session, you're going to be seeing what's on your screen a little differently, and you're going to edit a little differently, and you're not going to get consistent results. So that's number one. But also number two is get a color accurate, a calibrated monitor to work on. So that way you also know that what you're seeing on your screen meets some known standard that other screens that are also calibrated and printers will match with as closely as possible. And then at that point, the reality is that once you get your image looking perfect on your screen, that doesn't mean it's going to print like that. And that's just the difference between pixels and a monitor that's shining light through it at you, and paper with ink on it with light reflecting off of it. They're just different mediums. And so you're never going to necessarily, well, I don't want to say never. Sometimes, certain times, what you see on your screen and what comes out of the printer with nothing else done just magically kind of lines up really well. But in a lot of cases, that's not the case. So that's where things like soft proofing and test printing and kind of trial and error, like the rest of photography, to figure out the right workflow for you come into place. And that's where I think that my course really helps kind of take you through that process of soft proofing and test printing.
Yeah, very good. I think a lot of people they're kind of scared to print because, we've all experienced it where something looks really good on your monitor and then you send it straight to the lab and it just looks nothing like it. So it is really important to understand that there are adjustments in terms of luminosity, contrast, saturation that need to be made specifically for that file when you're going to print it. Otherwise, it's just not even going to come close to what you're seeing on your monitor. So some other people asked about sharpness and stuff in workflow. It really doesn't make sense to add any sharpness at any point until you know what the output file size is going to be. Because if you're going to be posting it on the web, you're going to be downsizing your file, which means you're going to add less sharpness than if you're stretching the file for like a 60 by 40 print. That's going to soften it, and you're going to have to add more sharpness for that. So at least for me in my workflow, I never do any kind of sharpening until I've finished processing the master file. And then from there, I'll take that final stamp layer, open it up in another project, resize it to whatever I need for whatever the output is going to be, and then I'll sharpen it accordingly. So if you're sharpening beforehand, it's kind of irrelevant because you don't know how much you should actually add since you don't know what size it's going to be at.
And you can exacerbate problems like noise. And I think this might be a good time to talk about that because we got a lot of questions about Topaz, Lightroom's new AI denoise. Is that all right if I do this now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And sharpening, when to sharpen, when to use the denoise. We've gotten so many questions about that. Um, and so Sean and I both talk about those things in our tutorials. And like Eric was saying, I don't think that you should be sharpening at the start. Some people will tell you to do capture sharpening, which is kind of like a very small radius, fine detail sharpening in Lightroom or Camera Raw. But let's say you have some noise in your shot, then you are sharpening the grain, you're sharpening the noise and making it worse. Um, and like Eric said, you don't know what your output's going to be. If it's for print or web, it's going to require different sharpening. And if you spend 2 hours processing a file, I don't think you should be baking in anything that you might want to undo later. So I usually turn off the sharpening in Lightroom and wait till the final step. That's kind of like an output step. And then the other part of that is noise reduction. So we have this new AI denoise in Lightroom, and I think it's excellent. And Sean concurs um, because, unlike Topaz and a lot of products we've had before, and Adobe's previous sharpening, it doesn't smudge up detail. It has a very consistent level of detail throughout, and it doesn't over sharpen or anything like Topaz can tend to do. And I'll talk about that in a minute. Um, and it's just a very realistic, clean result because Adobe's trained it on however many millions of photos. It works really well in like 97% of situations. Most of the time, it's really, really good. So you have like an ISO 1600 file with some grain. You would want to do that denoising at the start if you're going to use Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw's AI denoise, because you have to do it at the raw stage. And that's part of why it's so good. But in that 3 to 5% of instances where it doesn't work so well, like the Adobe product doesn't work so well, then you would just hold off on it and do that all at the end with Topaz. And just like with the sharpening, you don't want to bake anything in at the start because Topaz is pretty aggressive. Like it not only does noise reduction, but it does sharpening. Even the noise reduction only products do sharpening in them. So Topaz is kind of both at once, and it can have kind of uneven results, like blurry patches and sharp patches, and you really don't want to bake that in at the start and then process for 2 hours and put all this care into your file and find out that you've got these weird patches, like this weird artifacting. That's something you want to deal with at the very end. So AI denoise at the start if you need it and if it works for your file, and otherwise Topaz and sharpening and that stuff at the end. And one last thing I'll say about Topaz is that it can be pretty aggressive even if you turn down the noise reduction all the way. Um, so sometimes I'll take like a normal, like plain Photoshop Lightroom file and a Topaz file and lay them together, like 50-50 on the opacity. And then you kind of get between both worlds. So that's another technique you can use to back off on what Topaz does. But I hope that that answers that question. And Sean and I will talk about that a little more in our tutorials.
Michael, what are a few tools in Photoshop you would recommend for a beginner that's just getting started?
For a beginner. So I think the biggest thing in Photoshop is to just kind of learn the layout first, right? Because especially if you're coming from Lightroom, it's a little tricky. I think the biggest hurdle that people get stuck with is the layer system and then the masking system. But once you get those two things, the layers and the masks, everything else is like pretty straightforward. In terms of like my favorite tools, and we cover in multiple of our courses, we cover all of this stuff. So it's pretty cool. But um, my personal favorite thing, absolute favorite thing to do in Photoshop is standard classic dodging and burning. So using like a new layer, setting that to either soft light or overlay, and then just painting on the photograph. Alex, you were mentioning, I think, a Wacom tablet earlier, or maybe you put it in the chat, but that's also one of my favorite tools for, oh, maybe it was somebody else who posted that. But yeah, I use a little tablet to draw on the picture. And for me, like painting on the picture is so much more fun than pulling sliders because it feels more immersive. It feels like I'm becoming a part of the image more, at least for me. So that's my favorite tool. And then there's just a bunch of other really great color tools too, like the hue and saturation tool. Color balance is great. Some of the new, there was a few questions about AI. There's a lot of great AI tools that are coming out, and I know that the word AI is pretty scary because it means a lot of things right now. But there are a lot of fantastic AI technology tools that aren't there to replace photography, but just to like help us out. For example, the remove tool, technically the content aware tool that's been around for many, many years, especially the spot healing brush. Those are basic forms. Like when they first came out, those were basic forms of AI, machine learning to use the tool. So the remove tool is great. Sky selection is great. A lot of these new AI tools are fantastic. Not really sold on generative fill personally, but that's
I
just
like the
me.
ones that don't do any creative decisions and they're just kind of doing grunt work. Like
Exactly.
they're figuring out the things where you've always thought a computer should be able to understand, you know? Like remove that branch that's sticking in front. How come you can't figure it out, computer? Well, now it can with the remove tool.
It's things that like won't replace our creativity or our like how we interpret the photograph. It's more just tools that will help us to do little manual tasks, and things that would normally take a long time are a lot easier now because of some of these tools.
So, one quick thing about the workflow collection, just to share a little bit more about this project that we all created together. We each created a brand new tutorial video for this project. So, these aren't videos that we were selling before and we just put them all together in a package. This was a collection that we all planned out together. So, we each wanted to contribute something without overlapping too much and also not having anything be too, out of left field. And by watching all these videos, I think you're going to learn a lot that you can apply from each of us, and it's all very cohesive. So these videos will only be available as part of the workflow collection, which is only going to be available through May 20th of this month. And so if you want to purchase this collection, that's the only time. We're not going to go out and sell these videos apart from this afterwards. It's only going to be sold as part of this collection. So if you're interested in any of this stuff that we've been talking about, you have the next 10 days to purchase this collection because after that none of these videos will be available for purchase. So
And don't
just put
forget,
that
we're
out there.
giving 5 of them away at the end of this. So stick around.
Yeah. Only if you're here live. So if you leave, you'll be disqualified if your name gets drawn.
Yeah, we will make sure that you're here when we call your name. So stick around.
Yeah, and if anybody's interested in more information, we've shared links to the Learn Nature Photography website in the chat. You can find all the information about all the different tutorials there, and it'll be much more eloquently put together than anything that we'll say here. But essentially, it's 7 courses. They're all at around an hour to an hour and a half long. It's $199, and we put them all together with the theme of workflow in mind. And each tutorial covers a different part of the workflow, everything from printing with Sean to planning with Josh and post-processing, of course. And I think that the fun part of it for me is to see such a different, like you're seeing different parts of the workflow from different perspectives and different types of photography. And these are, 6 people that I've always really looked up to and really admired their work. So me personally, I'm really honored to be a part of such a awesome group here. So hopefully, if you guys are interested, you'll check that out. But we were talking about giving some away. So we're going to figure out how to do this, Sarah. So do we have any numbers for people that may have won a tutorial?
Yes, where are they? Okay, these people were all in the webinar a few minutes ago. So number 1 is Ming Jian.
All right.
All right, Ming. Congratulations.
Hopefully
Ming,
Ming is still here.
congratulations.
Number 2 is Cindy Brown.
Congratulations, Cindy.
All right.
Number 3 is Amit Chug. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Number 4 is Bernadette Talbot.
Awesome.
And number 5 is Eileen Riz.
Awesome. Congratulations, everybody. Have a fun weekend
Irene.
checking this out.
All right.
Rigged. We promise it
Someone
was not
say-
rigged.
Someone say rigged.
Oh, it
It was
I
a
rigged it
random-
all.
it was
I
a
rigged
random
it
number
How do you do
generator.
this?
Yeah. We
Random
assigned.
number generator matched
Yeah.
with the attendee list. No rigged.
I didn't recognize any of those names, so none of my friends got
Well,
hooked up.
Amit says it's not rigged.
Yeah.
I think he would agree.
He would know he won.
How does Bernadette feel about whether it's rigged?
Hey,
right.
just in addition to those, the 7 courses, the collection is 7 independent, separate courses that all, are around that same workflow theme, which is awesome. But there's also like a 1 hour and 15-minute roundtable discussion that we all had on a call like this, where we were just talking thoughts about our workflows. And some of the reviewers who have helped us out looking at this course ahead of time have said that's been their favorite part, is that roundtable discussion. There's also a really cool 44-page, essentially ebook, really nicely produced ebook that is a companion to the course, mostly designed and written by Sarah and Eric. It's just beautiful. And we also figured out how to generate transcripts and subtitles to go along with all the videos. So there's a lot in there. It's really a cool thing, and not something that I think I've seen anything else like out there before.
So I'd like to do a speed round and try to get through a few more questions before we finish. Sean,
All right.
since there are 400 people still in attendance, are there any live questions that have been asked that we haven't covered?
Yeah, we've got a ton. I mean, Michael and I and some of the others of us have been trying to type out answers as quick as we can. So if anybody wants to see our answers to the questions, you can go in the Q&A and go into the answered tab. But let's see, what else do we have? Let me just check here. I had one, but now I've lost it because so many more new questions have come in. Darn it, where did that go? Oh, here we go. So Sarah, this is a question about your comments on your portfolio, which is part of your vision. So this person's wondering, like, how much forethought do you give that vision for a portfolio?
I don't think it's so much like when you're in the field giving forethought to it. I think it's really all about tuning into your instincts. So when we start out in nature photography, we hear a lot about like, this is the right way to do things. This is how you practice nature photography. Like you go out for sunrise and sunset. This is the kind of best light. These are the type of best compositions. And I think it's more about kind of getting past that and instead thinking about what in the landscape resonates with me. Now that I have the basic skills, like what's resonating with me? If I'm seeing something in front of me, if it's sparking some kind of emotion like excitement or curiosity or feeling a sense of awe, then that's a sign to me that I'm connecting with what I see in front of me, and that means that's what I should be making a photograph of. So I think that for my practices, it's not so much a deliberate thought process. So we're here talking about workflow, which is a lot about like habits and patterns and practices. With vision, I think it's like being deliberate and spending time thinking about like tuning into your instincts. What colors resonate with you? What compositions resonate with you? What kind of landscapes resonate with you? So that's where you spend your time. And then once you're out in the field, it flows naturally as just a set of instincts and like being able to tune into your inspiration. So I think that's how I think about that question. It's not super straightforward and not full of practical advice, but I think that's what's worked for me really well, is like actually spending time thinking like what about this landscape is resonating, and then following that.
Perfect. I saw Jason Tucker in the chat, so I'm pretty sure he's still in the audience. He had a question. What key elements do you prioritize when composing an image, and how do you ensure they're effectively communicated to your audience? So to answer this as simply as possible, every single photograph needs a clear subject. So what is the photograph about? Is it about a mountain peak? Is it about a tree? Is it about a pattern or a design? Or is it about a feeling or an idea? And knowing clearly what it is you're making a photograph about makes all of your composition choices, like how close you should zoom in, how far you should stand back, what angle you should photograph the subject from. It makes all those choices so much clearer. So it's always so important to know exactly what it is you're making a photograph about, and then everything else is just going to be as clear as day. Otherwise, if you're not quite sure what it is you want to show, then it doesn't really matter what lens you use or what perspective you get or anything like that. So I feel like a lot of people, surprisingly, even though it's such a simple concept, do make photographs that are essentially about nothing because there is no clear subject, there is no clear message. It has a mountain and a tree and a rock, and there's no visual hierarchy. None of it feels more important than everything else. So you always want to make your subject draw the most attention, make sure everything else complements that subject, makes it look even better, makes it look even more whatever it is it expresses and enhances it. And I think that will always result in an effective photograph if you really pay attention to that.
And a quick thing to add to that is that sometimes in landscape photography, it can also be about a moment. And moments are not really things that a lot of landscape photographers think about, because a lot of landscape photography is a static scene. But sometimes, like Josh is a great example of this, a lot of his work, it's about a special moment. And choosing that moment that you choose to trip that shutter, choosing that moment wisely makes a tremendous difference as well.
I'm a big fan of processes. Like Sarah said, our backgrounds feed all of this. And yeah, my background's engineering. So process and procedures and step by step. And something that I like to ask people to do when they're trying to figure out what they're photographing is pretend they're on their phone to their best friend describing what's in front of them. And you wouldn't sit there and go, oh, well, there's 64 little pieces of dirt at my feet here. And I noticed that, it's just like, there's this amazing patch of flowers underneath this gigantic snow-capped mountain. And just by talking it out loud, you just go, ka-dunk, ka-dunk. Okay, that's the photo. You're not going, oh, and I saw a little root over here, and there was this little thing over there. You just like, it really focuses your attention. So you can try that exercise, and hopefully that might work for you as well.
Awesome. I'm seeing a lot of people have been ordering the workflow collection already. So I think everyone will really enjoy it. And yeah. Any other live questions, Sean, that you have queued up, or should I answer another one on here?
Let's try this one. And I don't know who this is for. Maybe somebody can jump in if they feel like they've got it. But I feel like it's more of a general question. But this is from Greg. He says that I've found over the years that I tend to get overwhelmed with my post-processing workflow to the point that I sometimes go through stages where I won't even process and my files just sit there. Any advice on how to overcome that? I think maybe I'm trying for perfect on every image.
That's a problem. I can relate with that a lot. Sometimes you just, the hardest thing to do is to just get started sometimes. I know once you have a backlog of images that have not been edited, it's really easy to just let them sit and let them continue to sit. But sometimes just jumping into an edit, with your favorite alcoholic drink in hand and without any expectations of coming away with a great image, sometimes just, breaking the ice and getting started. Once you do that, then it opens up the creative process, because the expectation of perfect is the biggest barrier to creativity a lot of times. So for me, just deciding to sit down, have fun, and edit often leads to, like, maybe that edit's not going to be great, but the next one that I open, like, I'll start to actually get the juices flowing and have a little bit of inspiration. And I mentioned it in the chat, like, one of the things that I find inspiring, or that helps me with inspiration, is just learning a new trick or a new tool or a new way to adjust color, something simple, just a different way of thinking about or a different tool can often unlock creative inspiration, because like it might push your creative edit into a different direction that you never thought of. And when you know, start doing something slightly different than you've done it before, so a lot of times it can be inspiring. And and uh and words are not coming because I didn't sleep last night, but you get the idea. Thinking hard, post processing, you just have to break the ice and get started.
Yeah,
And
don't be afraid of the sliders. You're not going to break anything. Just reset it if you
I,
do.
I have
Yeah.
an Aurora hangover. I'm sorry.
That's all right. But I agree with you, Nick. I think play is a great word to use there. And I would
Mhm.
say, don't be afraid to play and experiment. It's okay
Yeah.
if, they don't all have to come out perfect. In fact, none of them have to come out perfect.
Yeah.
But if you never, if you're being stopped from working on images because you're worried they won't be perfect, well, that's certainly not going to end up with, any results at all. So I would say, give yourself a break a little bit. Don't take it so seriously.
Yeah.
Experiment. And if you turn out photos that you're not happy with, enjoy the process. And you don't have to put the photos that you ended up not being happy with out there for anyone else to see. That's for you. And every time you do that, that procedure of getting in there and working and struggling and challenging yourself, but playing, that's improvement. Whereas
Yeah.
not doing anything is you're stagnant.
You said it much better than I did, Sean.
Oh, you did great, Nick. I
That's
love
why he
that.
chimed
Thanks for
in.
finishing my thought. Thinking hard.
Eric, we got any more questions? Or
Yeah, there was a quick one I saw in the Q&A. How has photography changed your life in an existential perspective? I thought that was a cool question. To put it as shortly as I can, photography has taught me to see the world in a different way and appreciate many more moments and different qualities of lighting. Like even just watching the light come through my bedroom window in the morning, I appreciate it a lot more than I ever did before I picked up a camera. And noticing these small miracles that are created by nature every single day all around me. As corny as it sounds, that really is what has happened. And it has just deepened my appreciation for the natural world. And the main point of making this workflow collection was to help you take better photographs of our remarkable planet. And hopefully those photographs can touch people that don't do photography, that don't go hiking, that don't go camping, so that they can appreciate this amazing place and want to take better care of it. So, we really wanted to put all of the knowledge that we could into this, and really just, we don't keep secrets. We don't hoard knowledge or anything like that. We really want to help everybody become the best photographer that they possibly can, because your voice does deserve to be heard, and we just want to help you achieve that in the best way possible.
A vertical moment where we are vertical is a good moment. Someday we're all going to be stuck in our rocking chair, wishing we could go outside and listen to the birds chirp and go on these amazing adventures that we all get to go on. And we're all trying to document. Don't ruin those moments by like stressing about whether you got the best composition possible. Actually go out and enjoy your time doing it. And
Yeah.
hopefully like learn a thing or two along the way and make a pretty photo along the way. That's what it's all about. Just enjoying life a little bit more and enjoying those little moments that happen in everyday life a little bit more.
And practically speaking, I think you'll make more interesting photos if you're not so worried when you're doing it. Like if you're not stressed out.
Absolutely.
So like letting go of the idea of I need to get a photo of every interesting thing I saw. I need X number of photos, and just instead kind of pull on one thread that you find interesting. And maybe that's the only photo you get, but maybe it's a lot more different than anything you've envisioned. Like it all comes from kind of chilling out a little bit. It is a little zen, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, stress stifles creativity.
Yeah. Like I can't, if I'm super uncomfortable, like after a really hard hike, like I have to wait a minute till I'm comfortable again before I'm making good photos. Otherwise I'm just distracted by the fact that I'm so uncomfortable. Or the same thing would be true if you're like racing to get light that you think is disappearing and you're stressed about missing it. Like try, but don't try at the same time. You know what I mean?
Let it flow, bro.
Just let it flow.
Oh,
Also, like I found it to be, especially when you're feeling a little uninspired and you don't want to like set out these big photo shoots and plan everything. Sometimes it's nice to just go for a hike or a walk, put one, maybe maybe you don't even have your camera, but maybe your camera with one lens in your bag, and just don't even plan on taking pictures. Just go out somewhere random. Doesn't have to be crazy. You don't have to go to the craziest place in the world. Just go to a park down by your house and just look at stuff. Just observe. And occasionally doing that, like I found really cool stuff to take pictures of, and it's gotten me more excited to then like get the inspiration going. And then I feel more rejuvenated to actually go take pictures more often. Because I feel like that over the years is the biggest thing I've struggled with is, well, one of the biggest things is just like not getting burnt out. And I feel like we've touched upon this a lot, but it can be easy to get pretty burnt out on taking photos and processing them, especially when it's all you do.
Can I, on that topic, I did have a little tangent here where I was doing some type races with attendees. So um, I
Most
missed
Alex
I
thing
missed
ever.
like 5 minutes of discussion, but we didn't talk about
Did anyone beat you?
no, but we didn't talk about file management, keeping it simple, did we? Because
Oh.
people have mentioned in the chat that the processing is intimidating and they feel kind of overwhelmed by their backlog. And we've got some questions that we haven't addressed yet that were about like kind of having a
I
really
think we have
complex
3,000 of those questions.
yeah, we
didn't
have
get
like a
to.
really
Yeah.
complex file management and how do I manage all these different cameras and memory cards and hard drives and programs and presets and plugins. And like I think if I could only have one camera, it'd be that Canon R5 behind me, and if I could only have one program, it'd be Lightroom because I can do the most in it, and that would be enough for like 90% of what I do, even though we use Photoshop extensively in our tutorials to get that last kind of 10% of perfection. And we use things like the TK panel to really precisely target what we're trying to do. Like if you feel overwhelmed by all that, just keep it simple. And in our tutorials, then don't think about, oh, he's saying he's using this mask, but think about why we're doing it. We explain why we're doing it. Like I want to darken this thing because it's going to take attention away from there and put it over here. And like that's really what it's all about, is just the ideas. And so in terms of file management and all that, you know, technical stuff that can get overwhelming, like try to keep it simple. Just one or two hard drives, one that you're working on, one for storage later. Just don't overwhelm yourself with every piece of software that a YouTuber has ever recommended. Like all you really probably need is Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop if you want to get a little more into it, and the TK panel if you want to get a little more into Photoshop. And you don't need 500 programs on your computer. You don't even need Topaz, even though it's really nice. So keep it simple.
So a lot of people in the chat are asking, sorry, Michael, 1 second. They're asking if we're going to do another webinar in the future. They're going to ask if we're going to make another collection in the future. Right now, we're just starting out with this and seeing how it does, and then we'll see how it goes from there. So
it's all
as of now,
Yeah,
me?
it's up to
no,
them.
them,
It's up
the
to them.
attendees. Yeah, I'm speaking to them.
If we sell 5, probably not.
Well, we already passed that a long time ago. So it does seem likely, but yeah, we're just starting out with this and seeing how this whole process goes. And we're going to improve things. I'm sure we'll learn from this experience, make the next one even better if we do. So Michael, what did you want to share?
Oh, it was super quick about just like file management and backups. Take it from somebody that this has happened to. You should have your stuff backed up you need 3 copies of your stuff at
And
all
one
times.
not where you are.
Yes, that is the most important thing. Have one in a different location. It could be a physical drive that you ship to family, or you could do online backup if you aren't shooting a ton of video and time lapse, which is a nightmare. But always have your stuff backed up. It is like the most important thing.
You seem kind of passionate about this.
Yeah, because I had when I was in college and I was doing photography, my house was burglarized and I lost like a good 4 or 5 months of my images. And it will never happen again, ever, because I will tell you it's the worst feeling. Like
You bought a gun and have some security now?
Yeah, but Michael, after I stole those hard drives from you, that really helped kickstart my photography career. So I appreciate that a lot.
That's where those. I was like, how are you there to? No. But no, yeah, just anyone, just make sure you're backing up your stuff.
Hmm,
Make sure you're backing up.
Yeah,
truth.
yeah. Sean's got something.
Hey, I just wanted to say real quick before we wrap this up, I wanted to thank we had some great beta testers, some people who kind of
Yeah.
previewed the course for us and gave us some input and some thoughts, and a lot of their comments are on the Learn Nature Photography website. So scroll down and you can see what they had to say, number one, but we also have links to their websites, a lot of really wonderful photographers there. So check out their work as well.
Yeah.
And we barely had to pay them anything to say all those nice things. So
They're all retiring now.
yeah,
Wait, that's coming out of our pockets?
your side comes out of your cut.
Comes out of my cut. Damn it.
Yeah.
What do you mean, cut? I thought I'm receiving all the profits.
Whoa, we need to talk
Oh.
about this.
Maybe there won't be another workflow collection.
Maybe not with Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever
Sarah,
happened to
there
Eric
was-
Bennett? He just disappeared.
I don't know if you saw that it's gone in the chat now. I sent you a message, Sarah. Someone asked, is the chat and the Q&A going to be available? Can we save that and send that out somehow?
We can definitely do the chat. The Q&A might take some formatting time, and we want to get this out quickly. So TBD on the Q&A.
Okay, so screenshot the Q&A right now if you want to keep that.
I could get on that. Start screenshotting it.
Okay.
We'll
So
be able to download it, Alex. I just am not sure about how much
Okay.
formatting it'll take.
Gotcha.
So we'll wrap it up with one last question. Sarah, did you see my message? I was asking you to find one that you could answer so we could hear some more from you.
I did not see that question, so I'm
Okay,
totally
sorry.
unprepared.
I was messaging you.
There
You
were some
wanna-
more. Here's one for Sarah.
Yeah, tee it off to her.
Okay, so Sarah, do you ever, this is from an anonymous attendee. Sarah, do you, not weird though. Sarah, do you ever go out alone to shoot at night or day with a tripod, and what precautions do you take?
So on one hand, I'm very fortunate that I'm married to another nature photographer, but I do go out by myself sometimes. And like when I'm in Death Valley, which is a place I feel very safe, I go out by myself all the time. I think for women, especially, or men who who are nervous about their personal safety, that it's about like assessing your surroundings, thinking through what are potential risks, and then I think just balancing like I don't want to live in fear all the time. So if I generally feel like I'm not in a place where I think I'll get robbed or worse, then I'm going to go out, and I'm going to try not to. Yeah, somebody said in the chat, Pamela said in the chat, being about situational awareness. So yeah, just trying to be smart about it. And I think one of the beautiful things about the nature photography world now is it is really easy to find photo buddies. So when I first started, I didn't know a single other woman in nature photography, and now there are so many of us. So it's luckily for me, it's not as big of an issue as it used to be. So not an easy answer. That's something we could discuss for hours, but I think for me, it's a balance: safety versus not living my life in fear.
All right.
Fight them, Nick says. I don't know what the context is.
Someone asked whose idea was learn nature photography. Alex and Sarah and Michael and I had been talking about doing some kind of a tutorial collection together for a while, but then what?
I see Nick's head cocking to the side, like, wait a second, wasn't this my
Well,
idea?
that was like separately, and then
Okay.
Nick reached out to us like simultaneously and asked if we were interested in doing this, and then that's
Nice.
how this
I
whole group
somehow
formed.
weaseled my way into it. Like without naming names, there's other tutorial collections out there. But a lot of times they tend to be just kind of a hodgepodge of a bunch of stuff that there's some good stuff in there, but there's a lot of totally unrelated things in there.
Or
And
old
there's-
things.
and there's not really any there's no quality control, let's say. And I just wanted to put something together that was simple. It didn't have tons of unrelated stuff in it. And I wanted to make sure that it was quality over quantity. It's not about how many tutorials are in some kind of bundle. It's about, how good those tutorials are. And that's why I reached out to these guys, is because these are, in my opinion, the best photography educators in the world, in my opinion. So that's why I reached out to these guys, is because I wanted to put together something to be proud of, and I feel like we've done it. And that was my inspiration behind it. I wanted to do something the right way, and
We did work a lot on this. Like, we thought
We did.
about everything very hard.
yeah, I
And
thought
we
it was
argued
going to be
over
a
every
little
little
bit more
detail to
simple
make sure
than
it was all
ended up
perfect.
being. Like
Yeah.
I thought there was going to be a little bit more simple, and like, oh, we'll put all, but it turned out to be a lot of work. And props to these guys, because everybody has done so much, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
Well, this was a
Folks.
launch party after all. It's time to go celebrate our achievement. So,
By taking a nap.
Well, for folks,
An Aurora
maybe for
nap.
folks who haven't been looking at the chat, should we show the website just so people have an idea, if you're still hanging on there, what we're
Yeah,
talking
sure.
about?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go for it, Josh.
Oh, okay, I'll
Well,
do it. Sure.
Also,
Is that
not that
landline internet
website.
gonna work?
Oh
the
yeah, I
other
just got to
website.
close a few tabs here. Hold on.
also, while you're
Show the
Yeah,
right
what
one
you
website.
got
tab at a
open
time
over there,
and loan
Josh?
fine.
while you're pulling that up, I'll just say, like, this is the most fun that I've ever had working on a tutorial too.
Yeah.
And I think that's been a big part of it. Like, oftentimes I'm, doing a tutorial and I'm just like, I guess I'll make one, but with this, it was like such a fun process working with everyone. And like, I just didn't, it's just been awesome so far.
It was really fun working with 5 of you and Eric. It was
Yeah, so the website's learnnaturephotography.com, and you can see all the courses and read some of the course details and all the things that we talk about. If it's for you, if it's not for you, you can read that and decide. But we think it's a pretty cool, comprehensive look at a lot of different skills within photography, but not just here's some cool, fancy techniques, apply them, but why would you do this? Why would you think in this way? Or how could you apply these techniques to your personal vision? Yeah.
Yeah, even when we're explaining fancy techniques, we try to explain why, so that even if you don't use Photoshop or use that particular thing, like, you can take that idea and use it however you need to in your own software, your own workflow. But hopefully there's something from all of us that you're able to employ. All right.
All right. Well, should we end this before we lose everybody?
I think we shall sign off.
It went by really fast. Surprised
It
it's already
did.
been an hour and a half, and
It did.
we didn't get through not even like 5% of the questions. So
No. I think if we stick it out for another 36 hours, we probably could.
we could take shifts.
That's going to be a big file to send to people afterwards. Anyways, thank you guys all for hanging out with us during this launch party / ask us anything. Hopefully we answered a few questions that some of you guys had, and thank you guys for spending this time with us. Make sure to check out the tutorial over at learnnaturephotography.com if you're interested in those tutorials. And yeah, thank you guys so much for spending this time with us. We're going to end the webinar now. Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Enjoy
Y'all have a
the
great night.
collection.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.
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 Photography's fun.